Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If you have already been joining us for the conference, if this is your first talk of the day, it is an excellent one. I am very excited for you to hear it. I am Dave Meckelberg, one of the organizers of the Recruitment Automation Conference, and I'm very proud to introduce Athena Karp, CEO and co-founder and founder of HiredScore, and she's going to be leading this conversation on balancing innovation with inclusion and compliance. So Athena, I will let you take it away, and everyone else enjoy the conversation.
Wonderful. So thrilled to be with you all this morning and to kick off the morning with one of my favorite leaders in the space and on such an important topic of how do you balance innovation agendas and innovation goals with compliance, diversity, which is often seen as an either or. And we have Gerri here from Unilever. I'll give a brief introduction of Gerri to talk to us much further about this topic. So I'm Athena Karp, as Dave mentioned, grateful to be here, and thank you to the Wade and Wendy team for letting us organize this panel on such an important topic. I'm CEO, founder of HiredScore. We do artificial intelligence solutions to make hiring more fair and efficient for the global Fortune 500, screening, sourcing, candidate selection, internal mobility, and also diversity and inclusion analytics and understanding. So Gerri, whom we're grateful to have, is the Associate Compliance and Diversity Manager at Unilever. She manages also the end-to-end affirmative action program and processes there. What's unique about Gerri that we'll get further into is how she really views partnership with the business, recruitment, talent acquisition, inclusion, as well as the equal employment opportunity, affirmative action, compliance, and legal agendas, and a marriage of all of the above. She has 15 years of experience producing relevant metrics, analytics, and solutions to enable these strategies to come to light. Such companies as KPMG and Johnson & Johnson before. And Gerri's agenda is really to amplify the voices of those who have traditionally been unheard, unseen, or ignored, and figure out how we can incorporate them into the workforce. We'll actually talk about a great example of visually impaired populations that Gerri has done a lot of incredible work in how they can be included, even through COVID, which introduces a whole new set of challenges, how she manages that. And then just the last thing for you all to know about Gerri is she's a Star Wars fan. So if you want to talk about Star Wars later, do that. Great. So let's kick off the agenda. Gerri, I'm going to play your Oprah and try to do justice. So I think what I'd love if we can just kick off with actually the current environment and how you're seeing the recent shifts from COVID to George Floyd impacting the space. One thing I know you talk a lot about is the war for POC talent. And I would love maybe if you can just talk further with this group about the environment, the POC talent war, kind of their level of education, their awareness, their savviness, what they're looking for in companies, and how you've kind of educated internally to help not just set an agenda, but enable an agenda.
Sure. So thank you, Athena. Thank you, Dave. Hi, everybody. Before George Floyd, before Breonna Taylor, before Ahmaud Arbery, there was already a war for POC talent. It's gotten more amplified because now you have diverse talent that is more educated and aware than probably they've ever been before. They're looking to investigate or look at a company's board of directors, executive committee, their leadership, who that company supports from a political action committee perspective, what organizations you're contributing to. They're becoming very, very savvy, and rightly so. If I was a POC and I wanted to go work for a company, I need to know that you're being supportive of me, understand my experience, and will amplify my voice and support me. The one thing that I want to bring attention to everybody on the call is that Your POC talent within your organizations right now is being pursued by recruiters from other companies. If you don't think that that's happening, you're sadly mistaken. There is going to be even an amplified war now for POC talent versus there was before.
Yeah, it's great. And I think the multi-tier approach of it's not just about hiring a branding agency and saying you want this talent. They're going to look on how representative is your company's board, how representative are the top 200 leaders within your company, how representative are every one of the hiring managers that they interact with in the recruiter process, right?
Right. And they're going to be looking at what are you doing within communities of color to support, to educate, to grow, and invest in those communities as well. It's all encompassing. It's a multifaceted approach that has to be taken by organizations. Training, processes, tech, you have to look at your data. You have to look at the communities that you're out in. How are you supporting them? It's all going together. It's not a one size fits all. It has to be very broad in the approach.
Yeah. And Gerri, I think it's a great point. You know, at HiredScore, we spend a lot of time on just the data and tech. And I think what we see is a lot of the clients want a silver bullet that will solve all the problems. So if I just buy this solution, we've checked the box and we can move on. And kind of maybe your experience with how multifaceted, you know, you mentioned technology, training, processes, using the data to then reemerge and understand where did we train, but we missed the mark, or where did we buy tech, but we actually didn't buy tech for blinding a hiring manager experience, because now there are a new gap and we see it in the data, right?
Right. So I had a mentor tell me a long time ago, what gets measured gets done. If you're just thinking about, well, if we hire more diverse talent, that's going to solve our problem, you're wrong. There has to be support within the organization for that talent to nurture and grow. So that's the educational piece. That's raising awareness. That's looking at what your consumers are. They're diverse as well. And I'm not just talking about race, ethnicity, gender. I'm talking about disability. I'm talking about veteran status, all the components of diversity. An organization has to be very well aware of what quote unquote diversity is before they can sit there and take on how they're going to address whatever their metrics might be saying.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think that actually segues quite nicely to how you balance innovation technology at a company that, you know, we feel so grateful to work with you all and just watch the speed of innovation that Unilever brings, and the innovation visions. And I think the notion of you as a facilitator, an educator, and a coach to make sure that innovation is not shut down or all or nothing, but rather guided throughout the process. So would be really great, I think, if you can give the audience maybe a perspective of how you think about that as a partnership, that is an end-to-end process. Where do you advise other people like you and other TA leaders or innovation leaders bring in people like you in different parts of the journey and some of the mistakes you see at other orgs?
Oh, sure. So my number one, as I've always said this, my number one mission is to mitigate risk to an organization from a compliance perspective. So I'm always coming from the perspective is, are we compliant? The US regs is what governs everything that I do, right? So coming from that and knowing that and being familiar with that, I know my responsibility is to sit there and educate my clients, my key stakeholders on what exactly compliance is, why it's important, the difference between equal opportunity and, you know, affirmative action. That's all part of, as a good compliance practitioner, what it is that I have to do. For me, my stakeholders are recruiting TA, D&I, HR, you know, legal. These are all the folks that I need to sit there and work with as best I can in the same space. For when we're talking about like looking at certain vendors or deploying certain instances or programs, whatever, it's always good for me to be in the beginning of the conversation versus 2 weeks before we go live. Because there are certain things because Unilever is a federal contractor. So there are certain components of the law that we must adhere to as a federal contractor. And so it's always bringing that voice into the space with the vendor, with my key stakeholders and my clients. I'm always here to support all like recruiting and TA and all that other stuff so that I can sit there and better educate them. I can help them do their job and they can help me do my job and do it successfully. When you are coming in and kind of like the end of the conversation, it's a little bit more difficult. And then the perception is that I'm the blocker, which I'm not. Because, well, you can't really ask that question, or maybe we should rephrase it this way, or, well, you really can't even ask that question at all, or you're missing you should be asking this question in whatever the process is. So to me, that's the greatest challenge that I have is I'm being asked to come in after the fact or once they've already started the process versus coming in the very beginning. So it's good to sit there and nurture and create those partnerships with all your key stakeholders and keep it going on a continuous basis. Let's have a conversation. Let me explain to you what's coming down the pipe from a regulatory perspective, how I think we should solve it. Here's some information I was on a webinar on, and they shared this as a best practice, and sharing that across my clients, as you would call them, my clients, so that they're more educated. And like I said, I can help them do their job better, and they can help me do my job better as well.
Yeah, and I'm just monitoring the chat. I do want this to be a dialogue as if we were all together. Where the question was, how does compliance tie in with D&I metrics, and what orgs can measure versus not? You know, Gerri, as the expert in this, I can let you answer that. I don't want us to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think what's important is there's a lot of objectives that we see companies having, right? Like create a diverse slate, which is absolutely the right goal. But letting people see gender and race data when making a decision is a no-no. So
Correct.
I think there's a lot of and this is what Gerri and we have so much respect for Unilever for, the marriage of there's a goal, there's ways we can or cannot get to it, and there are constraints we need to put in, and then there's creative workarounds.
Correct.
That will get us there, and how do we do that? So I'll let you
and still be compliant. So it's a conversation. So I've had with in the past, it was a conversation I had with someone who's in a geographic location where there isn't a lot of diversity, and so their main goal is well, how do we diversify our workforce? And so in the age of COVID, my first suggestion to them was, everybody's working from home, right? Yeah. Why can't all your positions be virtual? So that you can sit there and expand beyond where you are geographically to include the rest of the US and bring in your diversity that way, still be compliant. And like I said, diversify your workforce that way. And then you have these voices that you never had that were included before, which is the definition of diversity. And I want to go back to your question about, diversity and compliance and how those, the comment was how do they tie in together? They tie in beautifully together, because compliance is measuring race, ethnicity, gender, veterans, and disability status, what I call the 5 diversity components. I mean, we all know it goes much deeper than that, but just on a very high level. If you're doing affirmative action plans for females, minorities, people with disabilities, and veterans, well, those are 5 key groups that are typically underrepresented that you can sit there and then measure against your workforce. It's kind of like a no-brainer. They marry very well together. And at least in my experience, it's utilizing my affirmative action data and the analysis that I do to sit there and begin the conversation of what D&I is, and how we can go about meeting not just the goals for the AAP, but the goals for the organization as well.
Yep. And I think, how can you do that while ensuring, if you're using technology, which almost everyone is, that technology is configured, displaying, using only data that it's allowed to use or should use, only asking self-disclosure, not publicly scraping data and trying to complete the picture. So, we can get into much more specifics. It's a great topic, and it's one Gerri and I've spent a lot of time on, but it actually segues to the next question we had, which was, how do you think about the partnership with technology vendors? And, I have an image of Gerri coming into a room and quizzing me and saying, what are the hot spots? All the
Right.
other federal government contractors you've worked with, before
Exactly.
I start anything, walk me through what were their concerns and what did we
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
that will touch the 80%. And then
Right.
the work I can bring is the 20% specific to my industry, my gaps, my challenges. So I think if you can maybe share with the group on how maybe you help your client delineate between vendors that have worked with federal government contractors before and not, and then press the vendors that have on what have they done for everyone else, and how can that by design be part of what you gain?
Right. So for me, and I think anybody that works for a federal contractor can totally relate to this, is that, and I don't want to mention certain platforms, but I'm sure a majority of organizations that are on here are using the same platform. And I think we all know that there is never a federal contractor instance of let's say a Workday or a PeopleSoft or an SAP. There is never one. However, each of those companies have federal contractors as their clients. So instead of it being very vanilla out of the box, let's deploy whatever it is, my question always to the vendor is, well, what other government contractors have you sat there and implemented this? And I get that, Workday is an instance and there's usually somebody else that sits there and deploys it. But if, let's say, if it's an IBM or an Accenture, you still have worked with, or you are a government contractor, what challenges did you come across? How did you sit there and solve for it? And what did you do to implement it so that it was compliant, whatever it was that you were deploying? And that to me is the greatest challenge, because it's basically chirping crickets coming back at me. So then it's constantly pushing, well, look, it has to be this, the regulations say this, et cetera, et cetera. This is how we have to do it. This is the data I have to collect. And this goes back to my comment where if I'm brought in too late in that process, then everything has to be kind of like pushed back and we got to go back and retrofit. And that's usually, that delays everything. That's costly, costs the business. And to me, it's not productive enough. So to me, if I had a wish list, or if I had a wish that I needed to make with any vendors or any people that were implementing these things, it's like, ask the federal contractor community what it is we need, and then develop that and deploy that as part of your tools or part of the instance that you offer. And I guarantee you're going to see profits go up.
Yeah, and Gerri, we're actually seeing kind of the delineation between products that are out of the box, federal government contractor ready, and then can be whittled out for non. And actually more and more, one recommendation is the RFP process should cover how many federal contractors do you work with? Can we talk to them as a reference? What customizations, what's the extent of knowledge internally as a vendor, and how we can incorporate that in the earliest phase of selection, not right before launch, right?
Exactly. If firms, if organizations sat there and developed things from a federal contractor lens as their primary vanilla out of the box, I guarantee you companies and organizations that are not federal contractors would make a beeline to it, because you're encompassing all the things that are diversity related, accessibility related, et cetera, all in one-stop shop versus the opposite.
Yeah, great points. So, I think switching gears a little bit to how you stay ahead of the curve, and kind of what practices and methods do you kind of keep to keep you up to date? And then I actually think it ties really nice to doing this with an example that you gave me of, trying to push the needle on a type of disability you want Unilever to embrace and incorporate, and how you had a whole different set of challenges last year and then this year. So it'd be great.
Yeah. So for me, the pandemic, so COVID has affected everybody, whether you're in every way, shape, or form. Companies have learned, I think now, that not just their abled body, but their disabled workers can work remotely, can be productive, can make a positive impact to the business. For me, and Unilever is always very forthcoming and embraces the different diversity, different abled population and talent that's out there. So for me, we had an intern last year that started with us who was blind and had a service dog. So part of what I do in my role is to sit there and raise awareness of who the team she was going to be working with, how best to work with somebody that's blind. I worked with facilities to sit there and ensure we segregated just a special desk for her, places outside for her guide dog to go, etc. So it was a big collaborative situation for all of us to sit there, engage, and collaborate together to make this successful. She's come back this year, and so as you can imagine, it's completely different for training her team, her new team, on how to work with her because we're all virtual now. So I had to do a lot of research. Went to Microsoft's website because Microsoft is one of the leads. If I have a question or if I'm not sure about something, they have a whole section of their site that's just about accessibility and the tools that they offer. As a contractor, I go to ODEP, which is the Office of Disability Employment, JAN, which is the Job Action Network. Again, these are all external government resources that anybody can use to sit there and educate, get some tips, best practices from, and kind of put all that together in a deck, sat there with her team and walked them through. Here are some things that you need to be aware of in a virtual environment when you're working with somebody who's blind. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to improve her experience. It's going to improve her team's experience because they're a marketing team. So now you're getting the insight into not just working with somebody who's blind, but how are you going to market to your consumers that are blind? So there's that component too. And then as a follow-up, like I did last year when she started, I waited about a month or so, let her get settled into her job. And then I had a postmortem with her. Tell me what your experience is or was. What are we doing good? What needs to be fixed? Where are the gaps? So that way I can then better address those with the appropriate teams that I need to address it with. And so when there's a next person that comes in that's blind or low vision, I can sit there and then help them and they'll have a better experience. And what I learned was very, very clear for me is people who are disabled are willing to sit there and educate you. They are the subject matter experts in whatever their disability is. I'm not. I'm visual, I can see. I've lived my entire life as a person with sight. She is not. She's the subject matter expert to ask any questions of, so she can educate me.
Mm. Yeah, it's amazing because it does go back to the beginning of our discussion, which is when you're trying to attract this diverse talent, they're going to look for how equipped is your company to be able to embrace me and incorporate me. And they're also looking, most of them, she's a great example of someone who's a trailblazer, right. and hats off to her as an educator. But, people who might not be as bold or might be exhausted from educating are going to look to see how many blind team members does Unilever have? Show me the stats, show me how you've included them, let me talk to them. And I think,
right.
POC talent and war for that talent is going to have very similar questions. They don't want to be first in line, most of them. They want to join a company that has already made the accommodations and operated, right?
Exactly. And in my role, I'm one of the very few people within an organization that has a line of sight to who's self-identified. Because keep in mind, disability in veterans is a voluntary self-identification. And it's just a yes or no question. So I don't necessarily know if John Smith he just identified as a disabled person. I don't know what his specific disability is. I'm sure if you ask anybody that's on my team or within Unilever, I have no problem going up to folks that I see from a visible disability perspective. When we were all in the office, if it was a wheelchair user or something like that, hey, my name is Gerri. Look, I'm the compliance manager. Can I talk to you for a second? I want to pick your brain kind of on what your experience has been. What challenges do you have? And all these other things, so that I can then sit there and say, take that back to our business resource group and say, look, I spoke with this person. There are some issues that are not issues, but there are some gaps that we have. Let's talk about how we can address them. And go from there. It's lather, rinse, repeat.
Yeah. And it's almost the role, the question of what's the connection between compliance and D&I? And your response of, it's everything. It's kind of how you're also the ambassador and the representative of that voice within the org. Again, what processes, what training, what tech, how do we need to accommodate differently and how, which I think is terrific. And going back to that, there's no silver bullet. You know, one of the things we've learned, actually part of our D&I solutions and spending a lot of time in the data is, in some places it might be a front door population challenge. In others, it's the requirements of the role that are hindering it. You know, in others, it's non-enlightened hiring managers or, you know, just pure statistics that Unilever is a competitive place to get a job. Less than 5% of people will get hired and over 95% will get rejected. And if you're, you know, underrepresented group talent who gets rejected, how do you nurture, maintain, and kind of the overarching data strategy to look at that, diagnose, and build plans, right?
Right. And I think, and I know, I mean, I'm sure folks are asking, well, you know, how do you build like a diverse slate? So this is where you have to trust that your recruiting and your TA folks are fishing in all the right lakes or pools. And that if there are organizations that are outside of those pools, then they can add that to where they're fishing. Okay. So, you know, whether it's, and there are a lot of organizations, external organizations that are out there that, you know, if you're a federal contractor, you can go through the National Industry Liaison Group or the Northeast Regional Consortium Group, where they have external organizations. Some are not for profit, some of them are, that can help you with looking at adding to the pools of where you're fishing in. And underlying reporting and analytics, and even how AI can help you see the gaps that maybe manual processes are just continuing to do the same thing over and over, right? And Gerri, one other thing you and I have talked about before is this notion of how you stay involved in the solutions after launch. So I think it's an important topic of, there's a lot of platforms or products that come in the front door as one thing and then have new features, new capabilities, free launches. We're never vetted for AI and become AI. We're never vetted for, do they access this data and is that allowed, and then do. And kind of how do you think about continuing to stay involved? Maybe that's where the beauty of your partnerships is, to oversee. Yes, initially it was fine, but now we've crossed from the fine to not fine line, and let me put this back in check, right? Right. And so I mean, let's be realistic. Regulations don't move at the speed of technology. They do not. However, to meet the demands sometimes of a population, we as an organizations can lead in the space before the regulations actually have to take place, you know, and go into effect. So for me, it's, if you have those relationships built with all your key stakeholders and your clients, then it's an ongoing conversation. Or like I do, there's an ongoing training. Hey guys, look, this new regulation came out. Let me tell you what it means, how it impacts us, and why it's important. Because again, EEO and affirmative action have a very punitive stigma attached to it, when it's actually not. If you think about, I mean, once you educate people as to what it is, then I think they're a little bit more open. I mean, for me, with my key stakeholders, it's like, okay, tell me what it is that you want. Why is it that you want it? I'll explain to you what the regs say. And then let's think about a creative solution where we can meet the compliance and the regulations, but at the same time, give you what you need. And then of course have legal bless it, because legal always has to bless everything. So yeah.
And if you're working with the right vendors, the technology vendors should both come in and be able to support whatever these creative solutions are, and maybe recommend from other federal government contractors interesting other, you know, workarounds or creative solutions that they've enacted,
Right. And those vendors have to be open to that feedback. They have to be aware that there are companies out here that have to abide by certain regulations. So they have to be open to, I mean, you know, HiredScore totally is in that space, and they know that. They didn't need me to drill that into their head. They've got all that drilled into their head by others. But that's where you guys lead in that space, because you're aware of that. and you take that knowledge and you try to apply it to other clients who may not necessarily be a federal contractor. And that to me is key. That's what sets you apart from the others.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Gerri. I do think, I see in the comments the recalibration and the continual check-in, and that's so important. And I think so often technology is viewed as a project that goes live, check marks, and
that's it. And it's not.
Yep.
It is ongoing. It is always ongoing.
Yeah, amazing. And so I know we don't have so much time left. I did want to take us, back up 1,000 feet to, fast forward post-COVID. Mm-hmm. What's top of mind for you? What concerns you most? Kind of key priorities. How do you want?
So for me, I mentioned at the top, everybody's being impacted by COVID. Not just from a physical space, but from an invisible space. We are all in some way having to deal with, for lack of a better term, PTSD. There's the mental, there's the psychological, there's the emotional toll that this is taking on everybody. And I think organizations need to be aware of that. Mental health and well-being. What can we do? Can we utilize our, healthcare, or, carriers like, Cignas and the Aetnas and all that to address that? Leadership needs to be supportive of employees that may be in a space where they need that type of support, or at least acknowledge it. So I don't want to say if there's a silver lining in all this, it's that now mental health and well-being has now come to the forefront because everybody is in some way dealing with everything that's going on. And so to me, it's well, how do we care for our employees that way if there's an accommodation that needs to be made? And is the organization open to kind of thinking outside the box as to what that accommodation should be?
Mm-hmm. One of the beautiful quotes from your executive team is, if you want to multiply your workforce, invest in the mental health of your current workers. And overnight, without hiring anyone else, you've just gained more from less. So I think this notion of, you call it, Gerri, the invisible.
Right.
And
it's the invisible.
So how do you expand kind of your scope, maybe beyond just the traditional definitions of diversity into new definitions of diversity and new definitions of inclusivity? I think is really important.
I think if we put out the message, if it comes from leadership, from top down, that mental health and well-being, emotional well-being is important to us, or is important to, the leader and across the organization, and you have other leaders that kind of like reinforce that, then that trickles down through the organization. And I think then everybody would sit there and say, okay, look, they really care about how we're doing and what we're doing and how we're feeling. Partner that with the Cignas and the Aetnas as to what programs can be made available for employees to sit there and support them in this space. And then I think that addresses it. Because again, remember, disability is voluntary, but at the same time, you may have employees that need this type of support. I think also education is key. So that's where the Cignas and the Aetnas come in to sit there and say, look, let's educate your workforce as to some of the mental health and well-being programs that we have. Signs of things, work with your BRG or your ERG in the disability space to sit there and get that word out as well.
Yeah. And I know we're up on time. We could sit and talk all day. I think just closing words for this group of, advice, guidance as a 15 plus year veteran in trying to move this forward. It'd be great to hear.
Always try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Think about what their experience is. Be empathetic and open. And if you're not sure about something, ask. It may be, you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and asking a question. And as long as you're comfortable with being uncomfortable and your mind is open to be educated, you'll go far.
Amazing. Well, Gerri, thank you so much. I know this has been an amazing session for so many to join, and grateful we could have kicked off the morning this way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Athena. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Gerri, Athena, thank you so much. That was, they can both attest. I was so excited to have this conversation. It was one of the first of the day. And just based on the conversation flowing on the stage chat, I mean, really powerful stuff. So thank you both so much. Really excited. If we have a minute left, so if you stick around in this space just a minute, we have another treat for you. Carmen Hudson is going to be talking through the reviewing, reversing, and confronting discrimination. This is going to be a really powerful conversation as well. We're going to keep this going. So Gerri and Athena, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.